Good morning, everyone, and welcome to week one of our class. Hopefully you had a chance, and if you haven't already, I posted in the course overview, sorry, there's something on the screen, a welcome video, kind of overview of the class, and told you a little bit about myself. But here we're going to jump into week one, and this is what I'll do every week, and I just sort of talk about what's coming up on the week, try to see how it applies, those kind of things. So one other thing, and I'll just say this again, is if you have any questions, any concerns, the best thing to do is email me, and then we can either have an email conversation or I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call or a phone call or do anything like that. So what we're talking about this week is this kind of introduction to crisis communication. What is crisis? So, and my recorder tells me that my face is still on this, but maybe you're just hearing my voice, so I apologize. They updated the program I use to record these, and I'm not sure what's going on. So this is really crisis communication. What is it? And as you read, I'm going to focus a little bit on the book first. As you read the book, you saw there's a lot of, I wouldn't say debate, but people look at crisis differently. There's some commonalities. There's a lot of types of crisis. And so really thinking about, what are the key factors that make someone a crisis? And then the two articles that you read brought up this concept of issue management. So as I was kind of rereading those, prepping for today, I was thinking about, okay, why is this class designed? Why am I having you read this chapter that really goes deep into crisis and natural disaster and all of these things, and then giving you two pieces about issues management. And the link between those two is that issues, especially, and I wouldn't say especially, but at a organizational level, at a corporate level, exists, but the same thing happens in government and those kind of things. And those issues are sometimes the things that build into a crisis. So these could be things like if you're working at a company and, you're aware, or the company is kind of aware that there's some issues with a product, and people are kind of trying to do that. And then all of a sudden, something goes horribly wrong with that product, it harms someone, then you're in crisis mode. So really thinking about what's the difference between an issue and a crisis. And as communication professionals, what's really important and what I think sets us apart in terms of this kind of crisis management is that if we are aware of the issues, if we're constantly scanning, if we're thinking ahead, we can either A, deal with that issue before it becomes a crisis, but also can sort of project, okay, if a crisis were to occur, what can we do? And that's the final project for this class, is you're creating this crisis management plan. And so we don't always exactly know what that crisis is going to be, because as the readings pointed out, a crisis is unexpected, but we can have some plans in place about how we're going to communicate, who we're going to designate as a speaker, what avenues we're using. So some of the key differences, I just jotted down some of the things. So in terms of issues, one of the things is length. So issues are often ongoing. So I think a great example of this is in the kind of, let's talk about police departments. And so there have been long time issues about things about police brutality and police treatment of people of color and all of those kind of things, right? And so those are issues, and they're maybe being addressed, maybe they're not being addressed. But then we have a crisis moment, like the murder of George Floyd, or I was just listening today on the way to work, the trial for Ahmaud Arbery is starting. And even though the men who murdered him were not, at the time, police officials, the DA chose not to prosecute. So all of a sudden, these underlying issues that are very serious need to be dealt with. But then there's this crisis moment. So it is cute, unexpected, and, a crisis. So also, now natural disasters, a lot of times when they actually occur, we don't have a lot of notice. But we might be prepping for, okay, in the event of an earthquake, in the event of a forest fire, what are we going to do? And then so issues, you just kind of have more time to manage and you can really be strategic. In a crisis, you have to be fast, which again points to trying not to be caught unaware. Now, obviously, there are crises that we just could not prepare for. And so I think, the COVID-19 pandemic is probably a great example of things people are unprepared for. However, there has been criticism that funding for the pandemic readiness team had been cut under the previous administration. So even though they didn't particularly know that COVID-19 was going to happen, they could think about plans if that was going to happen. So I just wanted to make sure you understood if you saw a disconnect between the two articles and then the crisis. And again, just to reaffirm, like crises, there's, lots of different types and they're going to affect organizations differently, but thinking about the work you currently are doing or you want to be doing, like every organization can probably think about, like, here's 2 or 3 things that could happen that would be a crisis and how would we manage that. So I, was last night, and it was last night. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go on to some of the major news sites and see if there's anything that would classify as a crisis. So this was reported yesterday, and more than 10,000 John Deere workers are on strike after rejecting a contract. Now, if you are not directly related to John Deere, you don't work for them, or maybe you don't use their products, that's not personally affecting you. But for that company, for John Deere, this is a huge crisis, right? Their workforce is on strike. And most likely, I didn't read the whole article, but they are on strike because they believe they're being treated unfairly. The management is trying to get them back to work. So there's so much going on. Okay, so this is a great example of people working for John Deere. How are we going to manage this? And then obviously those labor unions, they're going to have people on their side too. Okay, so natural disaster. So fire crews make gains against Southern California blaze. I believe this is in San Diego. So the book, talked about the campfires, hurricanes, there's constantly natural disasters, huge crises moment. Here was another one. So sometimes a crisis takes place at a, governmental level, like state, local. So Haiti's kidnapping crisis is plunging the country even further into turmoil. So since the president of Haiti was assassinated, I think it was about a month ago, there's been a lot of chaos in the country. And apparently there's been a lot of kidnapping. Again, I was listening to podcasts on the way to work, and they were talking about 17 missionaries were taken into captivity. So again, who's dealing with that? Who is in place in the government? What does that mean for Haiti? And then this is an example of an organizational crisis, and this has been in the news a lot. So comedian Dave Chappelle, released a new comedy, stand-up, comedy video on Netflix, and said things that were transphobic and highly offensive. And there was a real backlash against Netflix, and employees within the organization were speaking out about things. And so some people have got fired. So all of a sudden, this is a huge crisis for Netflix, right? Because people are threatening not to pull their things from the kind of Netflix platform, or people are, talking about until things change, not using that platform. So again, lots of things. And these all took place between the 15th and 17th. So as you can see, crisis is all around us. And the other thing I want to emphasize is obviously the things making the national news. This is huge, but companies can also, at a local level, organizations can have a crisis. So thinking about this week, so there's the initial discussion question. I did post if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself so we can get to know each other. I can get to know you. I'd encourage you review kind of the final project, which is a crisis case study, and there's some milestones along the way, and then there's a few other smaller written assignments, so you can go ahead and look at those. But what you're going to want to be talking about is a topic. You're doing a crisis case study. One thing I would encourage you in whatever you choose is to be very focused. So for example, Corona, there's tons of things out there we could analyze. But if that was your topic, COVID-19, I would focus on, say, like a particular organization's response, like Purdue's response to the COVID pandemic, or a state government's, or local communities, or a business, a school system, something like that, right? Because it's only 3 to 5 pages. And so really focusing down, and again, those crises, and so a case study is somebody has done it. Like, so, yes. So it's not like speculation. So think about that, and I think that is it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So again, if you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you on the discussion boards.